He gave 4 black cards to test 4 women, until she showed the billionaire his late wife's necklace, and he froze. The September rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damian Huxley's Chicago penthouse, each drop echoing the hollow rhythm that had become his life. 5 years. 5 years since Clara's laugh had filled these rooms, since her presence had made this cold marble palace feel like home. Now it was just an expensive tomb, housing a man who'd forgotten how to live. Damian stood in his study, nursing his 3rd scotch of the evening, staring at the empty jewelry box on his mahogany desk. The velvet interior still bore the faint impression where Clara's emerald necklace had once rested, those Colombian emeralds that had been in his family for generations. The last gift he'd given her, fastened around her neck with trembling hands on their final night together, the last piece of her that should have remained, but it had vanished after the funeral, after the sympathy calls had stopped and the flowers had withered. He'd opened that box to find nothing but emptiness. No note, no explanation, just another piece of Clara stolen from him, as if losing her hadn't been cruel enough. "Mr. Huxley?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, pulling him from his bitter reverie. "The investigative team is here for your 5 o'clock. Damian drained his glass and straightened his tie. Time to begin his latest project, one that would finally prove what he'd suspected all along, that Clara had been an anomaly, a beautiful exception in a world full of vultures. That real love, pure love, had died with her. The conference room felt sterile under the harsh fluorescent lights. 3 men in gray suits sat across from him. Manila folders spread like evidence of humanity's greed. Marcus Blackwood, the lead investigator, cleared his throat. "We've compiled the profiles you requested, sir. 4 women, all in financially vulnerable situations, all fitting your specified demographics." Damian leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers drumming against the table. "Walk me through them. First, we have Marigold Thorne, 26, struggling actress in Los Angeles, behind on rent, student loans drowning her. She's been auditioning for years with no major breaks." Marcus slid a photograph across the table, a blonde with desperate eyes and a rehearsed smile. Second is Ivy Lockhart, 29, former social media influencer. Her brand collapsed after a scandal last year. She's been selling belongings to maintain appearances, but she's practically broke. Another photo joined the first, a redhead with carefully applied makeup that couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes. Third, Sylvie Merrick, 31, high school math teacher in Detroit, divorced, supporting 2 kids alone, drowning in medical bills from her daughter's asthma treatments. The third photograph showed a brunette with tired but determined features. Damian studied the faces, each one a story of need, of desperation barely concealed behind forced smiles, perfect subjects for his experiment. And the fourth, Marcus hesitated, flipping through his notes. "This one's interesting. We found her name in some old Huxley Manor files. Eleanor Hale. She was a private nurse who worked for several wealthy families in the area. She passed away 2 years ago, but she has a daughter. Renee Hale, 28, works as a nurse at St. Augustine Medical Center here in Chicago. She's clean, no criminal record, no debt issues that we could find initially, but..." Marcus paused, consulting his papers. Deeper investigation revealed she's been working double shifts. Her younger brother, August, was diagnosed with leukemia 18 months ago. The medical bills are piling up. Damian felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Even the noble nurse had a price. "Perfect. You know what to do." Over the next week, Damian watched his experiment unfold like a master chess player moving pieces across a board. The reports came in daily, each one confirming his cynical worldview with surgical precision. Marigold had been the fastest to break. Within 72 hours, she'd blown through $800,000 on designer clothes, jewelry, and a down payment on a Beverly Hills apartment she couldn't afford. The investigators' photos showed her stumbling out of Rodeo Drive boutiques, arms laden with shopping bags, her eyes wild with the fever of sudden wealth. Ivy had been more calculated but equally predictable. She'd organized lavish parties, rented penthouses, hired photographers to document her comeback. $500,000 vanished in a week as she desperately tried to rebuild her social media empire on Damian's dime. Sylvie had surprised him with her restraint initially, but her true nature revealed itself soon enough. She'd purchased 2 rental properties and invested heavily in pharmaceutical stocks. Ironically, several of Damian's competitors. Smart, but still motivated purely by self-interest. At least she was thinking long-term about her financial security. But the 4th report troubled him. Days passed with no activity on Renee Hale's account. No charges, no withdrawals. Nothing. Damian found himself checking the reports multiple times each day, his irritation growing with each blank statement. This wasn't how his experiment was supposed to work. Everyone had a price. Everyone. "Sir," Marcus called on Thursday morning, his voice uncertain. "We have a situation with the Hale subject." "What kind of situation?" She tried to return the card 3 times. Our operative posed as a charity representative and told her it was a healthcare worker appreciation grant. But she kept refusing it. Finally, she accepted it only after being told it would be insulting to the anonymous donor to refuse. Damian gripped the phone tighter. "And she still hasn't used it. It's been a full week, Mr. Huxley. Our surveillance shows her working 16-hour shifts, sleeping in the hospital break room between doubles. Her brother's condition is deteriorating, and the bills are mounting, but she hasn't touched the card. This was impossible. Everyone broke eventually. Everyone had that moment when self-preservation overrode principles. Clara had been the exception, but Clara was gone. This nurse was just stubborn, or stupid, or playing a deeper game. Increase surveillance," Damian ordered. "I want to know everything about her, what she eats, where she sleeps, who she talks to. Find the angle." "Yes, sir, but Mr. Huxley, there's something else you should know. We did some digging into her background, cross-referencing with your family's medical records. Her mother, Eleanor Hale. She was more than just any private nurse. She was the one who cared for your wife during her final days at the manor." The words hit Damian like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt, his carefully constructed experiment suddenly feeling less like science and more like fate, playing a cruel joke. Eleanor Hale. He remembered her. The quiet woman with kind eyes who'd stayed with Clara when he couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. The nurse who'd held his wife's hand through those last, agonizing hours. And now her daughter was unwittingly part of his twisted test of human nature. "Sir, are you there?" Damian cleared his throat, shoving down the unwelcome memories. "Continue the surveillance. This changes nothing." But as he hung up the phone, staring out at the Chicago skyline, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The fluorescent lights of St. Augustine Medical Center cast harsh shadows across Renee Hale's face as she checked her watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. 2:47 a.m., 19 hours into what was supposed to be a 16-hour shift. But Mrs. Patterson in room 314 had taken a turn for the worse, and Renee couldn't bring herself to leave until the woman was stable. Her feet ached in her worn sneakers, the soles so thin she could feel every crack in the hospital's linoleum floor. Her scrubs, faded blue with tiny cartoon bears that August had picked out 2 Christmases ago, hung loose on her increasingly thin frame. When had she last eaten a real meal? Yesterday, the day before. Time blurred together in this sterile maze of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. "Renee, you're dead on your feet," called Maria Santos, the night shift supervisor, appearing at her elbow with a concerned frown. "Go home, Patterson's stable now, and you've got another double starting in 6 hours. Renee shook her head, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I need to check on the Miller boy in pediatrics first. His fever spiked around midnight, and Dr. Williams is handling it." Maria's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been dealing with stubborn nurses for 15 years. "Honey, you're no good to anyone if you collapse. When's the last time you saw daylight that wasn't through a hospital window?" The question hit harder than intended. Renee couldn't remember. Her world had shrunk to these corridors, these rooms full of pain and hope in equal measure. Outside existed only as a concept, a place where normal people lived normal lives, unaware of how fragile everything really was. You need to go home to that brother of yours. He's worried sick about you working yourself to death." Maria's expression softened. "I know what you're doing, sweetheart. We all do. But August needs his sister alive and healthy, not burned out and broken." Renee's throat tightened. August, God. When had she last really talked to him? Really sat down and listened to his fears about the upcoming treatment cycle? She'd been so focused on earning enough for his experimental therapy that she'd forgotten he needed more than just money. He needed her. "Okay," she whispered, finally surrendering. "Just let me grab my things." The October wind cut through her thin jacket as she stepped into the parking garage. Chicago's autumn was harsh this year, winter arriving early with bitter promises. Her Honda Civic, a 2008 model with a temperamental starter and a passenger door that stuck, sat alone under a flickering light. Most of the other cars belonged to the overnight staff, sleek, newer models that reminded her daily of the gap between her world and everyone else's. The car coughed to life on the third try, and Renee pulled out into the empty streets. The radio played softly, some late-night jazz that reminded her of Mom. Eleanor used to hum along to similar melodies while she cooked breakfast on her rare days off, back when life was simpler and death felt like something that happened to other people. 20 minutes later, she climbed the narrow stairs to their second-floor apartment, each step echoing in the building's tired hallway. The paint was peeling, and Mrs. Chen's TV played too loud through the thin walls. But it was home. More importantly, it was where August waited for her, probably pretending to sleep when he was really listening for her key in the lock. She opened the door as quietly as possible, slipping inside and hanging her jacket on the hook behind the door. The living room was dark except for the glow from August's room down the hall. He'd left his door cracked, their signal that he was okay, that she didn't need to check on him immediately. But as she moved toward the kitchen, August's voice drifted out. "Renee, that you? Or did we finally get robbed?" Despite her exhaustion, she smiled. "Just me, kiddo. Go back to sleep." "Can't sleep?" "Come here a sec." She found him propped up in bed, his laptop balanced on his knees, homework scattered across the comforter. At 19, August still looked like the little boy she'd helped raise after Mom died, all sharp angles and two big eyes, made more prominent by the weight loss from his treatments. But his grin was pure mischief, the same one that had gotten him in trouble for putting glue in Tommy Morrison's hair in 3rd grade. "You look like hell," he said cheerfully. "Language," she replied automatically, settling on the edge of his bed. "And you're supposed to be sleeping, not doing calculus at 3 in the morning. Someone's got to keep up with schoolwork. Can't let cancer turn me into a complete slacker." His tone was light, but she caught the worry underneath. August had always used humor as armor, a trait he'd inherited from their father, along with his stubborn streak and his inability to ask for help. "The remote classes are going okay?" "Yeah, mostly. Professor Martinez is pretty cool about extensions when I have treatment days." He closed the laptop and set it aside. "Renee, we need to talk about something." Her stomach dropped. Those words never led anywhere good. "What's wrong? Are you feeling sick? Is it the pain again? I can call Dr. Morrison." "It's not about me." "Well, not directly." August ran a hand through his hair, still thick. "Thank God, though the next round of chemo would likely change that. I know about the experimental treatment, the one in Houston that costs—" "August, no, we're not discussing this. $350,000, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "I know you've been working doubles, triples when you can get them. I know you haven't bought yourself anything new in over a year. Hell, you're wearing scrubs that are practically transparent." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Those scrubs are fine. They're not. And you know it. Just like you know you can't keep this up." His voice cracked slightly. "Renee, I can't be the reason you destroy yourself. Mom wouldn't want that." The mention of their mother was a low blow, and they both knew it. Eleanor Hale had been the strongest person either of them had ever known, working 18-hour days as a private nurse, putting herself through school, raising 2 kids alone after their father's death, but she'd also been the first to recognize when a situation was hopeless, when holding on caused more pain than letting go. "Mom also didn't give up on people she loved," Renee said quietly. "And neither do I." August opened his mouth to argue, but a knock at the door interrupted them. They both froze. It was after 3 a.m. Who the hell knocked on doors at this hour? Renee's mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Accident. Emergency. Bad news that couldn't wait for morning. "Stay here," she whispered, grabbing the baseball bat they kept by August's bed. The knocking came again. Polite but insistent, Renee crept to the front door and peered through the peephole. A man in an expensive suit stood in their dingy hallway, looking completely out of place. He was young, maybe early 30s, with perfectly styled hair and shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Who is it?" she called through the door. "Ms. Hale, my name is Jonathan Pierce. I represent a philanthropic organization. I apologize for the late hour, but I was hoping to speak with you about a healthcare worker appreciation program." Renee's grip tightened on the bat. "It's 3 in the morning. I understand this is unusual, but my client prefers to handle these matters discreetly. You've been selected for a special recognition program for your outstanding service to the community." Every instinct screamed danger. Nobody showed up at 3 a.m. with good news. "I'm not interested. Please leave." "Ms. Hale, this is a significant financial opportunity. My client has authorized me to—" I said leave, or I'm calling the police. There was a pause. Then, "I'll return at a more appropriate time. Have a good evening, Mrs. Hale." She watched through the peephole until he disappeared down the stairs, then double-checked all the locks. August appeared in the hallway. Concern etched across his pale features. What was that about? Probably some scam artist. But even as she said it, something felt off. The man's suit had been too expensive, his demeanor too professional for a typical con. "Go back to bed. We'll talk about everything else tomorrow." August studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. But Renee, promise me you won't do anything crazy to pay for that treatment." "I mean it." She kissed his forehead, tasting the salt of unshed tears. "Get some sleep, kiddo." But as she lay in her own bed an hour later, staring at the ceiling while sirens wailed in the distance, Renee couldn't shake the feeling that the well-dressed stranger's visit was just the beginning of something much larger and more complicated than a simple scam, something that would change everything. The man returned the next evening at 6 o'clock sharp, just as Renee was getting home from another exhausting shift. This time, she was ready for him, or as ready as anyone could be for a stranger in a $1,000 suit appearing in her neighborhood like a lost investment banker. She watched from her kitchen window as he approached the building, noting how he carefully avoided the puddles and stepped around the broken concrete with practiced precision. Everything about him screamed money and privilege, from his Italian leather shoes to the way he carried himself like the world owed him something. The knock came exactly 3 minutes later, 2 polite raps, not urgent but impossible to ignore. "Ms. Hale." His voice carried through the thin door with that same professional courtesy from the night before. "I hope this is a better time. I really would appreciate just a few minutes of your time." Renee cracked the door but kept the chain latch engaged. "I told you I wasn't interested. I understand your caution truly, but this is a legitimate program, and you've been specifically selected based on your exemplary service record at Stugustine Medical Center." He held up a leather portfolio. "I have documentation, references, everything you'd need to verify this is authentic." Despite herself, Renee found her curiosity piqued. "What kind of program?" "A healthcare worker appreciation initiative. My client, who wishes to remain anonymous, has established a fund to recognize nurses who go above and beyond in their service to the community. You've been working double and triple shifts, often without adequate rest, caring for patients who can't always pay for their treatment." The accuracy of his information sent a chill down her spine. "How do you know about my work schedule?" "It's all public information. Mrs. Hale, hospital records, your supervisor's commendations, patient testimonials. You have quite a reputation for putting others' needs before your own." Renee loosened the chain slightly. "What exactly are you offering?" Jonathan Pierce, if that was really his name, reached into his jacket and withdrew a small black envelope. "A token of appreciation for your dedication. My client believes that those who give so much of themselves should be recognized for their sacrifice. I don't want charity. This isn't charity, it's recognition. There's a difference." His smile was practiced but seemed genuine enough. "Think of it as a scholarship, a grant for someone who's proven their commitment to helping others." Against her better judgment, Renee unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. The man was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s. With kind eyes that didn't quite match his corporate appearance, he held out the envelope with a slight bow. "I can't accept this," she said, not taking it. "You haven't even seen what it is yet. It doesn't matter. I don't take money from strangers." Pierce's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been genuine surprise. "Ms. Hale, this isn't random money from a stranger. This is a structured program with oversight and accountability. You're not being asked to do anything in return except continue being the exceptional nurse you already are. The answer is still no. For the second time, Pierce seemed genuinely taken aback. May I ask why? Most people in your situation would at least want to know the details. My situation? Renee's voice hardened. And what situation is that, exactly? I didn't mean to offend. I simply meant that with your brother's medical expenses and your current financial obligations, this could provide some relief. Now she was getting angry. The casual way he mentioned August, the assumption that she was desperate enough to accept handouts from mysterious benefactors. It all felt wrong. How dare you? How dare you investigate my family and then show up here acting like you're doing me some favor? Miss Hale, please. No. Whatever this is, whoever you work for, the answer is no. I don't need your help. She started to close the door, but he spoke quickly. Your brother needs that experimental treatment in Houston. $350,000. Your insurance won't cover it, and you're already working yourself to death trying to save enough money that you'll never have time to actually earn. The words hit like a physical blow. Renee gripped the door frame, her knuckles white. Get out. I'm trying to help you. By stalking my family. By investigating our private medical information, that's not help. That's harassment. Pierce held up his hands in surrender. You're right. I apologize. My client simply wanted to ensure the funds went to someone truly deserving, and your situation. Stop calling it a situation. Renee's voice was barely controlled. My brother has cancer. We're not a situation to be analyzed and solved by some rich person's guilt money. That's not what this is. Then what is it, really? She studied his face, looking for tells. Because nobody gives away money to random nurses without expecting something in return. So what do you want? Publicity? Tax breaks? A feel-good story for your boss's charity newsletter? Pierce was quiet for a long moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was softer. My client lost someone very important to him. Someone who believed in the goodness of people. In helping others without expecting anything in return, this program is his way of honoring that person's memory. Despite herself, Renee felt her anger wavering. There was something in his tone, a sadness that seemed genuine. She'd heard that particular grief before, from families in the hospital who'd lost someone too young, too suddenly. I'm sorry for his loss, she said quietly, but I still can't accept this. Why not? Because I don't know who he is. Because showing up in the middle of the night feels wrong. Because my mother taught me that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. She paused, then added more softly. And because if I take this money and something happens to August anyway, I'll never forgive myself for taking charity instead of earning it. Pierce stared at her for a moment, then did something unexpected. He laughed. Not mockingly, but with what sounded like genuine amazement. Your mother raised you well, he said. She did, which is why I'm going to close this door now and I don't want to see you again. Ms. Hale, wait. He held out the envelope one more time. What if I told you that refusing this would actually be insulting to my client? That turning down his gesture of appreciation would hurt someone who's already been through enough pain? Renee hesitated. The manipulation was obvious, but there was something in his voice. 1 week, Pierce continued. Just hold on to it for 1 week. If you decide you can't use it, destroy it. But please don't make that decision right now, in anger. Before she could protest again, he placed the envelope on her doormat and stepped back. 1 week, Ms. Hale, that's all I ask. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway staring at a small black envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. August appeared behind her, moving quietly on bare feet. What was that about? Renee picked up the envelope, surprised by how normal it felt. Just paper and whatever was inside. I'm not sure. You gonna open it? She turned the envelope over in her hands. No return address, no markings except her name written in elegant script across the front. I don't know. Well, August said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. We always do. But as Renee stared at the envelope later that night, unable to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. And change, in her experience, was rarely something to celebrate. Still, she kept the envelope. Just for a week, she told herself. just to prove that she could be trusted with whatever this was, even if she never intended to use it. 7 days later, sitting in Dr. Morrison's office and hearing the words rapid progression and limited time, Renee finally understood what desperation really felt like, and for the first time in her life, she broke her own rules. The transaction had been simple. One swipe of a black card that felt impossibly heavy in Renee's trembling hands. $350,000 transferred to Houston Methodist Hospital for August's experimental treatment. Nothing more, nothing less. She'd walked out of the bank feeling like she'd sold her soul. But for the first time in months, her brother had a real chance at survival. Now, 3 days later, as she handed out medications on the children's ward, Renee tried to push down the guilt that gnawed at her stomach. She'd written the letter, a formal promise to repay every cent, and delivered it personally to the bank manager. It didn't matter that she had no idea how she'd actually managed to pay back that astronomical sum. What mattered was that August would live to see her try. "Nurse Renee," called out Sophie Martinez, a 6-year-old with pigtails and a smile that could light up the entire hospital despite her ongoing battle with cystic fibrosis. "Will you sing the elephant song?" Renee glanced around the pediatric common room, noting the other children had stopped their coloring and puzzle games to listen. They all knew the routine by now. Whenever one of them asked for a song, the others gathered like moths to a flame, hungry for any distraction from their medical realities. "Which elephant song?" Renee asked, settling into the circle of tiny chairs that always made her feel like a giant. "The one about the peanut circus, or the one about the dancing elephant who forgot how to dance?" "The dancing one," chorused several voices at once. As Renee began to sing in her clear, gentle voice, she noticed a man in a hospital gown standing in the doorway, mid-30s, dark hair, expensive looking even in the standard issue cotton. He was watching her with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. But she'd learned not to judge patients by their appearance. Grief and fear wore many faces in this place. She finished the song to enthusiastic applause from her small audience, then noticed the man was still watching. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she saw something there. Pain, maybe, or recognition. But he looked away quickly, disappearing down the hall before she could approach him. Over the next week, she kept seeing him around the hospital, always alone, always observing. He seemed to appear whenever she was having particularly difficult moments, comforting the Hendersons after their daughter's setback, holding Mrs. Chen's hand as she said goodbye to her husband of 47 years, singing lullabies to the premature babies in the NICU when their parents couldn't be there. It was during one of these moments, after losing Mr. Patterson despite 3 hours of desperate efforts to save him, that she found herself sitting alone in the chapel. The hospital's interfaith space was small and usually empty, just a few simple pews facing a wall with symbols from various religions. It was the only place in the building where the constant noise of machines and monitors couldn't reach. Renee sat in the front row, still wearing her scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and sadness. She wasn't particularly religious, but sometimes she came here to think, to process the weight of other people's tragedies that she carried home each night. Rough day. She looked up to find the mysterious patient standing in the doorway. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he held himself like someone carrying invisible weight. "They all are lately," she replied honestly. "You're the man I've been seeing around the floors. Are you visiting someone?" "In a way." He slid into the pew beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. "I'm David Henderson. I'm here for some routine tests, but they're taking longer than expected." The last name rang a bell, like the Hendersons with the sick daughter, but Renee didn't press. Patient privacy was sacred, and families often had complex dynamics. She didn't need to understand to do her job. "Losing someone never gets easier, does it?" he said quietly. The question was so unexpected, so precisely what she'd been thinking, that Renee felt her carefully maintained professional composure crack slightly. "No, it doesn't. I lost my wife 5 years ago," David continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Car accident. 1 minute we were planning our anniversary trip, the next..." He trailed off, staring at the multi-religious altar. "Since then, I just exist. I go through the motions, but I'm not really living." Renee studied his profile. The sharp jawline, the expensive haircut that couldn't hide the profound sadness radiating from him. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of family members who never quite recovered from their loss. "I'm sorry," she said. What was she like? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Kind. Impossibly kind. She saw good in everyone. Believed people were fundamentally decent even when they gave her every reason not to. She used to volunteer here. Actually, reading to kids in the cancer ward. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she would absolutely hate what I've become since she died. His laugh was bitter. She'd probably sit me down and give me one of her lectures about honoring her memory by actually living, not just surviving. Renee found herself leaning slightly closer. There was something magnetic about his pain, the way it echoed her own fears about losing August. Maybe she's right. Maybe surviving isn't enough. Easy to say, harder to do when living reminds you of everything you've lost. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two strangers sharing the weight of grief in a space designed for contemplation. Finally, Renee spoke. "My brother has cancer, leukemia. For the longest time, I was so focused on keeping him alive that I forgot to actually live with him. I was working constantly, missing his good days because I was terrified there wouldn't be enough money for his bad ones. What changed?" Renee thought about the black card, the mysterious benefactor, the impossible choice she'd made. Someone reminded me that love means nothing if you're too afraid to risk it. David turned to look at her fully for the first time. Someone wise, or someone desperate. She smiled sadly. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Your brother is lucky to have you fighting for him. He's fighting for himself. I'm just trying to make sure he has something worth fighting for. She paused, then added quietly, "Your wife wouldn't want you to stop living because she couldn't. Love doesn't die just because the person does. It finds new ways to exist." The words hung between them, heavier than either had intended. David's face had gone pale, his hands clenched in his lap. "I should go," he said abruptly, standing. "My tests. They're probably ready. Wait." Renee stood too, confused by his sudden change in demeanor. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, you said something right. That's the problem." He looked at her one more time, and she saw something crack in his expression. "Your mother raised you well, Renee." He was gone before she could ask how he knew her name, before she could question the familiarity in his voice when he said it. She stood in the empty chapel, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. Over the next few days, she found herself looking for David Henderson, but he seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. She asked around discreetly. Nurses gossiped. It was an occupational hazard, but nobody could remember a patient by that name. It wasn't until she was restocking supplies in the oncology wing that she noticed them. New machines, state-of-the-art equipment that hadn't been there the week before. When she asked her supervisor about it, Maria just shrugged. Anonymous donation. Someone's been dropping serious money on this place. New equipment, funding for families who can't afford treatments, even upgraded the break room coffee machine. Do we know who? Nope. They want to stay anonymous, but whoever it is has good taste in medical equipment and excellent timing. We were about to lose funding for 3 different programs. As Renee walked home that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that David Henderson, if that was even his real name, was connected to these mysterious donations. The timing was too convenient. His interest in her work too specific, but more troubling was the way he'd looked at her in that chapel, like he was seeing a ghost, like she reminded him of someone he'd lost, someone who used to volunteer in the children's cancer ward, someone impossibly kind who believed in the fundamental goodness of people. Someone named Clara. 2 weeks had passed since David Henderson's mysterious disappearance, but the anonymous donations kept flowing into St. Augustine Medical Center like water through a broken dam. New ventilators appeared in the IQ overnight. The pediatric wing received a state-of-the-art imaging machine that would have taken the hospital board 3 years to approve through normal channels. Most shocking of all, 7 families received calls informing them that their children's treatment costs had been covered by an anonymous benefactor. Renee couldn't concentrate during her shifts. Every new piece of equipment, every grateful parent, every upgraded facility felt like a breadcrumb in a trail she was afraid to follow. The timing was too perfect, the generosity too targeted. Someone was watching the hospital, understanding exactly what they needed and when they needed it. someone who knew the system from the inside. It was Maria who finally confirmed her suspicions. "Renee, honey, you've been distracted all week," her supervisor said, cornering her in the supply closet during their Thursday night shift. "What's eating at you?" "The donations," Renee said without preamble. "They're not random, are they? Someone's been watching us, studying what we need." Maria's expression grew careful. "What makes you say that?" "The Mitchell family's little girl needed that specific type of dialysis machine, and it showed up 2 days after her diagnosis. The Hendersons' insurance denied coverage for their daughter's experimental treatment, and suddenly they get a call saying it's been paid for." Renee counted off on her fingers. "The pediatric wing needed that imaging machine for months, and it appeared right after we lost Tommy Rodriguez because we couldn't get him diagnosed fast enough. Sometimes good things just happen." "Renee, not like this. Not this precisely." She studied Maria's face, noting the way her supervisor avoided eye contact. "You know something." Maria sighed, closing the supply closet door behind them. "Look, I don't know much, but whoever this benefactor is, they've been asking very specific questions about our operations, not through official channels. They seem to have their own sources." "What kind of questions?" "Which nurses work the most overtime? Which families are struggling the most with payments? Which patients need treatments that insurance won't cover?" Maria paused. "They specifically asked about you, Renee." The blood drained from Renee's face. "About me. Your work schedule. Your brother's situation. Your mother's background. I didn't give them anything. Patient confidentiality and all that. But they seemed to already know most of it. David Henderson. The man who'd sat with her in the chapel. Who'd known her name without being introduced. Who'd vanished right before the donations started appearing." Renee's hands began to shake. "Did they mention a name? David Henderson? Or maybe their real name?" Maria shook her head. "All communication came through intermediaries, very professional, very discreet." "Why, do you think you know who it is?" Before Renee could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from August. "Labs came back. Dr. Morrison wants to see us both tomorrow at 2 p.m. Might be good news for once. The experimental treatment. August had been in Houston for 2 weeks now, and the early reports had been cautiously optimistic. But something in his text, the forced casualness, the way he'd added, "for once," made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "I have to go," she told Maria. "Family emergency." "Renee, wait." But she was already grabbing her jacket, her mind racing with possibilities both wonderful and terrible. The mysterious donations, David Henderson's intense interest in her work, the timing of everything. It couldn't all be coincidence. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour, most of the day shift having gone home hours ago. Renee's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as she made her way to her car, fishing for her keys in the depths of her purse. "Mrs. Hale?" She spun around. Her heart hammering, a figure emerged from the shadows between 2 cars. Tall, expensive suit, familiar face. David Henderson, looking exactly as he had in the hospital corridors. Except now there was something different in his posture, less patient, more businessman. "You," she breathed. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About how you've been stalking me. About how you've been investigating my family." The fear was rapidly converting to anger. "Who the hell are you, really?" "My name is Damian Huxley." The name hit her like a physical blow. Huxley, as in Huxley Pharmaceuticals, the massive company whose logo appeared on half the medications they dispensed at the hospital, as in the Huxley Foundation, whose charitable donations had built the new children's wing 5 years ago, as in the billionaire widower whose wife had died in a car accident, whose story had been splashed across every newspaper in Chicago. "You're the anonymous benefactor," she said, pieces clicking into place. "You're the one who's been donating to the hospital. Among other things, the card, the money for August's treatment, that was you too." Damian stepped closer, and in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. "Yes." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Because I needed to know if people like you still existed. People like me. People who choose sacrifice over self-interest. People who see a fortune in their hands and use it to save someone else instead of themselves." His voice was rough. like the words were being dragged out of him against his will. People like my wife. Renee's mind reeled. This was some kind of test. You tested me. You and 3 others. The others. They reacted exactly as I expected. Spent the money on themselves, on luxuries, on securing their own comfort. His laugh was bitter. But you broke every assumption I had about human nature. So this was all an experiment to you. My brother's life, my desperation, my family's suffering. It was all just data for your cynical little study. No, yes, it started that way. Damian ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked exactly like the broken man she'd met in the chapel. But then I met you. Really met you. Not just watched you through surveillance reports. Surveillance reports. Renee's voice rose. You had me followed. I needed to understand how someone could refuse unlimited wealth. I needed to see what made you different. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. And then I saw you working. Saw how you cared for your patients. How you carried their pain like it was your own. You reminded me of Clara. The name came out flat, accusatory. Yes. They stared at each other across the empty garage, the weight of his admission hanging between them like a challenge. Renee felt a dozen emotions warring in her chest. Betrayal, hurt, anger, and underneath it all, a terrible understanding. She's the one who used to volunteer in the children's ward, Renee said quietly. The woman who read to the cancer patients. How did you? Because I do the same thing. I sing to them, tell them stories, hold their hands when they're scared. And you saw that and thought what? That I was some kind of replacement for your dead wife. No. I thought you were proof that I was wrong about everything. His voice cracked slightly. Clara always believed people were fundamentally good. After she died, I convinced myself she was naive, that real goodness died with her. But you, he gestured helplessly, you proved that maybe she was right all along. So you decided to what? Rehabilitate yourself through my pain. I decided to stop being a ghost and start being human again. The words came out in a rush. Renee, these past weeks, watching you work, talking to you in that chapel, you made me remember what it felt like to care about something other than my own grief. By lying to me, by manipulating me. Yes, the admission was simple, devastating, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unconscionable. But I needed you to know that what started as cynicism became something else entirely. Renee backed away, shaking her head. I can't do this. I can't be your redemption project or your wife's replacement or whatever twisted thing this is. You're not. I have to go. August needs me in Houston, and I can't. I can't deal with this right now. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. The money for his treatment. Keep it. No strings attached. He deserves a chance at life. Whatever you think of me, I'm going to pay you back. Every cent. I don't care what you want. She turned back to face him, her eyes blazing. You don't get to play God with people's lives and then act like the wounded party when they reject your charity. I'll pay you back, and then I never want to see you again. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Damian standing alone in the empty garage. But as she pulled onto the street, she caught a glimpse of him in her rearview mirror, a solitary figure under the harsh lights, looking exactly like the ghost he'd claimed he used to be. And despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation and violated trust, part of her felt sorry for him, which only made her angrier. 2 months since Renee had left Damian standing in that parking garage, and she hadn't heard a word from him. No more mysterious donations appearing at the hospital. No more men in expensive suits showing up at her door. No more David Henderson sightings in hospital corridors. It was as if he'd simply vanished from her life as abruptly as he'd entered it. But August was alive. The experimental treatment in Houston had been nothing short of miraculous. Week by week, his blood counts had improved. The aggressive cancer cells that had been multiplying through his system were retreating, beaten back by a combination of cutting-edge medicine and sheer stubborn will. Dr. Morrison had used words like remarkable recovery and exceeding all expectations. August was going to live. And now, standing in the cramped employee break room at Chicago Memorial Hospital, her new job, closer to home and with better pay, Renee stared at the letter in her hands for the third time that morning. Payment plan proposal, $350,000. No interest, no deadline. Pay what you can when you can. The letterhead was simple, professional, Huxley Financial Services. No personal message, no attempt at contact beyond the basic business correspondence. Just an acknowledgement of the debt and terms so generous they bordered on insulting. "Still obsessing over that letter?" asked Janet Pierce, a fellow nurse who'd become Renee's closest friend since she'd started at Memorial 6 weeks ago. Janet was in her 50s, divorced twice, and had the kind of practical wisdom that came from raising 3 kids as a single mother while working nights. "He's trying to absolve himself," Renee said, folding the letter and shoving it back into her locker. "Make himself feel better about what he did by being magnanimous about the repayment. Or maybe he's just being decent about money that clearly means nothing to him. It's not about the money, Janet. It's about what he did. The lies, the manipulation, the fact that he turned my family's tragedy into some kind of psychological experiment." Janet settled into one of the plastic chairs that had probably been uncomfortable when they were new in 1987. "Honey, I've been a nurse for 28 years. I've seen every kind of family crisis, every type of desperate situation you can imagine. And you know what I've learned." "What?" "Sometimes the how matters less than the outcome. Your brother is alive and healthy. That treatment he got, it's given him a future he wouldn't have had otherwise. Maybe the man who made that possible isn't a saint, but he's not the devil either." Renee wanted to argue, but the truth was she'd been having similar thoughts for weeks. Every time August called with good news from his follow-up appointments, every time she saw him smile without the shadow of death hanging over him, she felt the same confusing mix of gratitude and resentment. "I need to pay him back," she said finally. "All of it. I can't move forward with this debt hanging over me. On a nurse's salary, Renee. Be realistic. Even with good terms, $350,000 is..." "I know the math, Janet. I've been doing night shifts here, picking up weekend work at the clinic downtown, and I've got a part-time gig doing medical consulting for an insurance company." Renee's voice was determinedly cheerful, but Janet could hear the exhaustion underneath. "At this rate, I'll have it paid off in, about 30 years. That's insane. You're going to work yourself to death trying to pay back money to a man who has more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. It's not about him. It's about me, about not owing anyone anything." Renee grabbed her jacket from her locker. "I have to go. Meeting with the insurance company in an hour." But Janet was right about one thing. The math was brutal, even working 70-hour weeks across 3 different jobs. Renee was barely making a dent in the principal. The interest-free terms helped, but $350,000 might as well have been $3 million for all the progress she was making. Which was why, on a gray Thursday afternoon in December, she found herself standing in the gleaming lobby of the Huxley building in downtown Chicago, staring up at 50 floors of glass and steel that represented more wealth than she could comprehend. The security guard at the front desk looked like he'd been hired specifically to intimidate people who didn't belong in buildings like this. He was polite but firm when Renee explained she needed to speak with someone about a financial matter. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is regarding a substantial debt. I'm sure someone in accounting or legal can..." "Ma'am, Mr. Huxley's office doesn't handle individual payment concerns. You'll need to contact our customer service department during regular business hours. This isn't a customer service issue. This is..." Renee paused, realizing how insane this was going to sound. "Look, I need to speak with someone about paying back money that was given to me for my brother's medical treatment. A lot of money." The guard's expression didn't change. He'd probably heard stranger things. "I can give you the number for our accounts receivable department. I've tried that. They keep transferring me to different departments, and nobody seems to know anything about individual payment arrangements." Renee pulled out the letter, smoothing it on the counter. "See, Huxley Financial Services. Someone in this building has to know about this." The guard glanced at the letterhead, and for a moment, his professional composure slipped. "Ma'am, this doesn't go through normal channels." "What does that mean?" "I mean this kind of arrangement. It comes from the executive level, Mr. Huxley's personal office. Then I need to speak with Mr. Huxley's personal office." "Ma'am, that's not how this works." Mr. Huxley doesn't take unscheduled meetings. His calendar is booked months in advance. Renee had spent 2 months working up the courage for this confrontation, and she wasn't going to be defeated by corporate bureaucracy. Then schedule me. I'll wait however long it takes. I'm sorry, but listen. Renee leaned closer to the counter, her voice dropping to the tone she used with difficult patience. I'm not leaving until someone acknowledges this debt. I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking to do the right thing and pay back money that was given to me. Now, that's either going to happen through proper channels, or I'm going to sit in this lobby until someone makes it happen. The guard studied her face, clearly trying to determine if she was serious. Whatever he saw there convinced him. Let me make a call. 20 minutes later, Renee found herself in an elevator climbing toward the 50th floor, accompanied by a woman in an impeccable suit who'd introduced herself as Amanda Sterling, executive assistant to the CEO. Ms. Hale, I have to tell you, this is highly irregular, Amanda said as they rose through the floors. Mr. Huxley's schedule is completely booked, and he's in back-to-back meetings until 7 tonight. I'll wait. That could be hours. I've got time. Amanda's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with a frown. Actually, it seems Mr. Huxley's 4 o'clock just canceled, if you're willing to keep this brief. The elevator doors opened onto a floor that looked more like a luxury hotel than an office building. Soft lighting, actual artwork on the walls, carpet thick enough to get lost in. Amanda led her down a hallway lined with windows that offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. He's just finishing up a conference call, Amanda said, stopping outside a set of double doors. I'll let him know you're here. As Amanda disappeared into the office, Renee found herself alone in a waiting area that probably cost more than her annual salary to furnish. She sat on the edge of a leather chair that was more comfortable than her own bed, clutching the envelope with her first payment, $2,000 in cash, representing every extra dollar she'd earned in the past 2 months. It wasn't much. It wasn't even a dent in what she owed, but it was a start. The office doors opened, and Amanda emerged with a strange expression on her face. Ms. Hale, Mr. Huxley will see you now. Renee stood, smoothing her simple dress, the nicest thing she owned, purchased specifically for this meeting, and walked toward the doors that would take her face to face with the man who'd turned her life upside down. And as she stepped across the threshold into Damian Huxley's office, she had no idea that everything was about to change again. The office was massive, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. Modern art hung on charcoal walls, and a conference table that could seat 20 dominated one side of the room. But Renee's attention was fixed entirely on the man standing behind the mahogany desk, his back to her as he stared out at the city below. Damian Huxley looked exactly as she remembered, yet somehow different. The expensive suit was the same, the perfect posture unchanged, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of exhaustion, of weight carried too long. Ms. Hale. He turned slowly, and their eyes met across the expanse of his office. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting you. Really, because I've been trying to reach someone about my debt for 2 months. Renee's voice was steadier than she felt. Your people keep transferring me from department to department like I'm some kind of collections problem they can't figure out how to solve. That's because there's nothing to solve. The payment terms in that letter are exactly as stated. Pay what you can, when you can. No pressure, no deadlines. And I'm here to pay. She held up the envelope, her knuckles white around the edges. $2,000. It's not much, but it's a start. Damian's expression shifted. Something that might have been pain flickering across his features. Renee, you don't need to. Yes, I do. She stepped forward, placing the envelope on his desk. I need to pay you back. All of it. Every cent. Why? The simple question hung between them like a challenge. Renee had prepared for this moment, rehearsed her arguments during the long elevator ride, but standing here in his office, faced with the man who'd manipulated her family's crisis for his own psychological experiment, all her carefully constructed reasons felt inadequate. Because I can't move forward with this debt hanging over me, she said finally. Because I can't accept charity from someone who what? Someone who used my brother's cancer as a test subject for his cynical worldview. The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she was tired of pretending this was just about money. Do you have any idea what it felt like to discover that my family's suffering was just data in your experiment? Damian winced, but he didn't look away. Yes, actually, I do. Do you? Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you got exactly what you wanted. You proved whatever point you were trying to make about human nature, and now you get to feel magnanimous by offering generous repayment terms. That's not... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Renee, what I did was unconscionable. I know that. But it wasn't about proving a point by the end. It was about what? About assuaging your guilt over your wife's death. About finding some poor nurse to project your grief onto. Her voice was rising. Months of suppressed anger finally finding its target. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? The similarities between your wife and me, the way you watched me work with the children, the way you looked at me like I was some kind of ghost. You're right. The admission was quiet, devastating. At first, that's exactly what it was. You reminded me of Clara in ways that made it hard to breathe. But what I felt for you... Don't. Renee held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't you dare tell me this became something real for you. Don't try to romanticize what was fundamentally a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal. You're absolutely right. But it also became the most real thing I'd felt in 5 years. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and completely unwelcome. Renee felt something crack in her chest, the carefully maintained anger that had sustained her through 2 months of 70-hour work weeks and sleepless nights. I was falling in love with you, Damian continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Not because you reminded me of Clara, but because you were nothing like her. Clara was gentle, trusting, saw the best in everyone. You're fierce, stubborn, suspicious of charity and kindness. You fight for what you believe in even when it hurts you. Stop. I was falling in love with your strength. Your refusal to give up, the way you carried other people's pain like it was your own responsibility to heal the world. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. And I knew that if you ever found out the truth about how we met, you'd hate me, which you do, which you should. Renee felt tears threatening, and she blinked them back furiously. You lied to me. You manipulated me. You turned the worst period of my life into some kind of psychological study. I did, and I've regretted it every day since. Regret doesn't fix what you broke. Damian. His name felt strange on her tongue. The first time she'd said it out loud since learning his real identity. You want to know why I need to pay you back? Because I can't love someone who's holding my brother's life over my head. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and they both froze. Love. She'd said love, present tense, revealing the truth she'd been trying to bury for 2 months. Renee, I was falling for you too, she whispered, the admission scraping her throat raw. David Henderson, the broken widower in the hospital chapel who understood grief and loss. I was falling for a fiction, a character you created to manipulate me. He wasn't entirely fiction. The grief, the loss, the way I felt when I talked to you, that was real. But the foundation was a lie. Everything we shared was built on deception. She wiped at her eyes angrily. Do you have any idea how that feels? To discover that someone you cared about was studying you like a lab rat the entire time? I stopped the experiment. After that first week, I canceled the whole thing. After you'd already gotten what you needed from me. After you'd confirmed that the pure-hearted nurse would sacrifice herself for her dying brother. Her laugh was bitter. Congratulations. You proved your point. People like me do exist. Was that worth destroying any chance we might have had? Damian's face crumpled. No, God, no, Renee, if I could take it back. But you can't. That's the thing about lies, Damian. Once they're out there, they poison everything that comes after. She picked up the envelope from his desk, her hands trembling. I'm going to pay you back. Every cent. And then we're done. I don't want your money. I don't care what you want. You don't get to make that choice for me. You already took away enough of my choices. She turned toward the door, then paused. August is in full remission, by the way. The treatment worked. He's going to live. I'm glad. I know how much he means to you. He means everything to me. And you saved his life. I'll always be grateful for that, even if I can never forgive you for how you did it. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Your mother would be proud of you. Renee froze, her hand on the door handle. What did you say? Eleanor, your mother. She was Clara's nurse. At the end, she stayed with my wife when I couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. Clara talked about her constantly, how kind she was, how she made the unbearable somehow bearable. The room seemed to tilt around Renee. Her mother had mentioned a patient named Clara, years ago, a young woman with kind eyes who'd been too sick, too young, but she'd never mentioned the last name, never connected it to the pharmaceutical empire or the tragic widower who'd made headlines. You knew, she breathed. You knew about the connection when you selected me for your experiment. No, I swear I didn't know until after. The investigator found her name in old employment records, but the connection to Clara, I didn't make that connection until much later. I don't believe you. It's the truth. Your selection was random. Just another name in a file, but maybe. He paused, something breaking in his voice. Maybe it wasn't random at all. Maybe Clara and your mother somehow arranged this. Don't! The word came out sharp, final. Don't you dare try to make this about fate or destiny or some cosmic plan. You chose to lie to me. You chose to manipulate my family's crisis. Own that choice instead of hiding behind mystical explanations. She yanked open the door, desperate to escape before the tears she'd been holding back finally fell. But as she stepped into the hallway, she heard him call her name one last time. Renee, I love you. I know I don't deserve to say that, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. Instead, she walked toward the elevator on unsteady legs, leaving Damian standing alone in his office with $2,000 and the ruins of whatever they might have been. The elevator doors had barely closed when Renee felt the first tear slip down her cheek. She pressed herself against the back wall, grateful for the privacy of the empty car, as months of suppressed emotion finally broke free. By the time she reached the lobby, she was sobbing, ugly, choking sobs that made the security guard glance up with concern. She stumbled through the revolving doors onto the busy Chicago street, the December wind cutting through her coat like ice. People hurried past, bundled in expensive wool and cashmere, their faces focused on destinations that mattered to them, normal people living normal lives. Unaware that her world had just shattered again, her phone buzzed with a text from August. How did the meeting go? Did you give the rich guy his money back? Renee stared at the message through blurred vision. How could she explain what had just happened? How could she tell her brother that the man who'd saved his life was the same man who'd broken her heart twice, once through deception, and now through a truth that made everything infinitely more complicated? It's complicated, she typed back. I'll explain when I get home. But as she walked toward the train station, Renee realized she couldn't go home. Not yet. She couldn't face August's concerned questions, or sit in their small apartment where every corner reminded her of the desperation that had led her to accept Damian's charity in the first place. Instead, she found herself walking aimlessly through downtown Chicago, past holiday decorations that seemed to mock her emotional devastation. Christmas was 3 weeks away, and for the first time in months, August was healthy enough to enjoy it. They should be planning celebrations, not drowning in the complicated aftermath of lies and manipulation and feelings that refused to die, despite every logical reason they should. Her phone rang. Janet from work. Hey, honey, how did the meeting go? Did you get everything sorted out with the payment plan? Renee stopped walking, leaning against a storefront window. It's complicated. What kind of complicated? Legal complicated or emotional complicated? The worst kind, both. Where are you? You sound like you're crying? Downtown, outside some fancy boutique where a single purse probably costs more than I make in a month. Renee wiped her nose with her sleeve, not caring how she looked. Janet, what do you do when you find out that everything you believed about a situation was wrong? But the new truth is somehow worse than the lie. Oh, honey, what happened? I can't explain it over the phone, but I think I need to go home and pretend this day never happened. Absolutely not. You need alcohol and chocolate and someone to listen to you vent. My place, 1 hour. I'll order Thai food and open the good wine. 3 hours later, Renee was curled up on Janet's couch, a glass of wine in her hands, and the whole story spilled between them like a confession. Janet had listened without interruption, her expression growing more incredulous with each revelation. So, let me get this straight. Janet said, refilling both their glasses. "This billionaire guy sets up an elaborate test to prove that people are greedy. You're the only one who passes the test. So he decides to investigate you personally. During this investigation, he falls in love with you while pretending to be someone else. Then you find out about the deception and rightfully want nothing to do with him. But now it turns out your mother took care of his dying wife. Which means the universe has a sick sense of humor," Renee finished. "And I'm apparently the punchline. Or," Janet said carefully, "it means something else entirely." "Like what?" "Like maybe this isn't about cosmic jokes or cruel experiments. Maybe it's about two people who found each other despite impossible circumstances. And now you have to decide if the connection is worth fighting for." Renee set down her wine glass harder than necessary. "He lied to me, Janet. He manipulated my family's crisis for his own psychological experiment. How do I get past that? I don't know, but I do know that your brother is alive because of him. And I know that when you talk about this Damian guy, your whole face changes, even when you're angry at him, even when you're listing all the reasons you should hate him. You light up? That's not... It is. Trust me. I've seen you go through enough dating disasters to recognize the difference between irritation and heartbreak. This is heartbreak, honey, which means what you felt for him was real, regardless of how it started." Renee pulled a throw pillow into her lap, hugging it against her chest. "It doesn't matter if it was real. The foundation was built on lies. Was it? Or was the foundation built on two broken people recognizing something in each other that they needed? You're taking his side. I'm taking your side. Which means I'm pointing out that you've been miserable for 2 months, working yourself to death trying to pay back money to a man you claim to hate. That's not moving on, Renee. That's punishing yourself. I'm not punishing myself. I'm maintaining my integrity. By working 3 jobs to pay back a debt to someone who doesn't want or need the money. Honey, that's not integrity. That's pride. And pride is just another kind of prison." Renee wanted to argue, but the words felt hollow. The truth was, she had been miserable. Every day felt like she was going through the motions of living without actually being alive. August was healthy. Her job was going well. Her life was objectively better than it had been in years. But none of it mattered, because the person she'd wanted to share the good news with was the same person who'd betrayed her trust. "I should go," Renee said, standing unsteadily. "August will worry if I'm too late." "Renee, wait." Janet stood too, catching her arm. "Just think about what I said, okay? Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads to the best thing, and sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself to be happy." The train ride home was a blur of lights and stops and people with their own complicated lives. Renee dozed fitfully, her head resting against the cold window, dreaming of hospital corridors and emerald necklaces and a man with sad eyes who'd made her believe in possibilities she'd forgotten existed. She climbed the stairs to their apartment slowly, exhaustion weighing her down like a physical force. The building was quiet except for Mrs. Chen's television, and she could see light under their door. August was still awake, probably waiting to hear how the meeting had gone. She fumbled for her keys, the simple task made difficult by wine and emotional exhaustion. The key ring slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor, and as she bent to retrieve it, something else fell from her coat pocket, her mother's necklace. The emerald pendant caught the hallway light, throwing tiny green reflections across the dingy carpet. Renee had been wearing it every day since the confrontation with Damian, finding comfort in the tangible connection to Eleanor's memory. But now, looking at it lying on the floor, she was struck by something she'd never really considered before. The emeralds were unusually large, unusually perfect. The setting was clearly antique, clearly expensive. Where had her mother gotten a necklace like this? Eleanor had been a private duty nurse, comfortable but not wealthy. She'd never owned jewelry like this, had never owned anything like this. Renee picked up the necklace, studying it more carefully than she ever had before. On the back of the pendant, barely visible, was an engraving. "Para Clara, mi amor eterno, D." Her blood turned to ice. Clara, Damian's wife. This was Clara's necklace. With trembling hands, Renee turned the key in the lock and stepped into their apartment. August was on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, but he looked up when she entered. "Hey, how did it?" He stopped, seeing her expression. "Renee, What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She held up the necklace, the emeralds catching the lamplight. "August, where did this come from, really? I need you to tell me everything you remember about Mom getting this. I told you before, it was from one of her patients. Some lady who was dying gave it to her as a thank you for taking such good care of her." August set aside his laptop, concern creasing his features. "Why? What's going on? What else did Mom say about this patient? Do you remember anything else?" "Not much. Just that she was young, younger than Mom. And it was really sad, because she had a husband who loved her so much but couldn't handle watching her die." August paused. "Mom said the woman gave her the necklace because she wanted it to go to someone with a pure heart. Someone who would understand what real love looked like." Renee sank into the chair across from him, the necklace heavy in her hands. Everything was connected. Clara had given this necklace to Eleanor. Eleanor had given it to Renee. And somehow, impossibly, Renee had ended up falling in love with Clara's widowed husband. "Renee, you're scaring me. What's this about?" She looked up at her brother, healthy, alive, full of future because of money that had come from the man whose wife had once worn this very necklace. The coincidences were too many, too precise. This wasn't random chance. This was destiny, and she had no idea what to do with that knowledge. Renee stared at the necklace until the emeralds blurred together, her mind racing through impossible connections and devastating realizations. The engraving on the back seemed to pulse with significance. "Para Clara, mi amor eterno." D for Clara, my eternal love. From Damian. "August," she said quietly, not looking up from the pendant. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about Mom's last patient. The one who gave her this necklace. Everything. Renee, what's going on? You're freaking me out. Please, just tell me." August shifted on the couch, his expression troubled. "I don't know much. Mom didn't usually talk about her patients. You know, confidentiality and all that. But this one was different. She came home crying the night the woman died. Crying. Yeah, I'd never seen Mom cry about a patient before. She said it was because the woman was so young, and because her husband was..." August paused, searching for the words. She said he was completely destroyed, that he couldn't even be in the room at the end because the pain was too much for him. Renee's throat tightened. That sounded exactly like the man she'd met in the hospital chapel. Broken, hollowed out by loss, unable to fully engage with life, because living reminded him of everything he'd lost. Mom said the woman, Clara, I think her name was, spent her last few days talking about her husband, how much she loved him, how worried she was about what would happen to him after she was gone. August's voice grew softer, and she talked about the necklace, said it was a family heirloom, something that had been passed down through generations of women who'd known real love, and she gave it to Mom. The night before she died, Mom said Clara took it off and pressed it into her hands, made her promise to give it to someone who would understand what it meant, someone who knew how to love completely, even when it hurt. The necklace felt impossibly heavy in Renee's hands. Clara had been dying, and instead of keeping her most precious possession for her husband, she'd given it to Eleanor. Why? What had she seen in Renee's mother that made her think she deserved this legacy? Mom wore it sometimes, August continued. Special occasions, mostly. She said it reminded her why she became a nurse, to help people through the hardest moments of their lives, to be there when families were falling apart and try to hold them together, even just for a little while. Did she ever mention Clara's husband, his name, or what he did for work? Not really, just that he was wealthy. Mom mentioned he had a huge house, lots of staff. She felt sorry for him because she said money couldn't fix what was broken in him. August studied her face. Renee, why are you asking about this? What does this have to do with your meeting today? Renee set the necklace on the coffee table between them, the emeralds catching the lamplight like captured starfire. The man who paid for your treatment, the one I went to see today, his name is Damian Huxley. His wife's name was Clara. August's eyes widened. You're saying this necklace belonged to his wife? I'm saying more than that. Renee's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm saying that somehow, impossibly, I fell in love with the widower of the woman who gave Mom this necklace. The same woman Mom cared for during her final days. That's... August ran his hands through his hair. That's insane. What are the odds? I don't think this is about odds. August, I think this is about something else entirely. They sat in silence for several minutes, both staring at the necklace as if it might provide answers to questions they didn't know how to ask. Finally, August spoke. What was he like when you met him? Broken, lost, angry at the world, but mostly at himself. Renee thought about those conversations in the hospital chapel, the way Damian had talked about existing rather than living. He reminded me of you, actually, in those first weeks after your diagnosis. Like he was going through the motions of being alive without actually wanting to be. And then he started to come back to life, slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk again after a terrible accident. She paused, remembering the way his face had changed when she challenged him about living like a ghost. I thought I was helping him heal. I thought we were helping each other heal. Maybe you were. But it was all built on lies, August. He was experimenting on me, studying me like a lab specimen. How do I get past that? August leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? And I want you to really think about the answer. Okay, if you had known from the beginning who he was, if he'd walked up to you in the hospital and said, "Hi, I'm the billionaire whose wife your mother cared for, and I'm conducting an experiment to see if good people still exist," would you have talked to him? No, absolutely not. Would you have accepted his help with my treatment? Never. So maybe the deception wasn't about manipulating you. Maybe it was the only way he could get close enough to someone genuine to remember what that felt like. Renee wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat, because August was right. If she'd known who Damian was from the beginning, she would have run in the opposite direction. She would have seen his wealth and his experiment, and assumed the worst about his motives. That doesn't make it right, she said finally. No, it doesn't, but it might make it understandable. August picked up the necklace, turning it over in his hands. Mom used to say that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the worst things, that we have to look past the packaging to see what's really inside. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe this Clara woman and Mom arranged this somehow. Maybe they saw something in both of you that needed healing, and maybe the universe conspired to put you in each other's path. You sound like you're talking about fate. I'm talking about love. Renee, real love. The kind that transcends death and finds ways to keep working even after the people who felt it are gone. August held up the necklace, the emeralds casting green shadows across his face. Clara loved her husband enough to give away her most precious possession to ensure it would find its way to someone who could teach him to love again. Mom loved us enough to carry that legacy forward, even though she probably never understood why it mattered. Tears were streaming down Renee's face now, months of suppressed emotion finally finding release. I'm so angry at him, August, for lying, for manipulating our crisis, for making me fall in love with someone who didn't really exist. But did he exist? The man you met in that chapel, the one who talked about grief and loss and learning to live again, was he real? I thought so, at the time. Then maybe he was. Maybe David Henderson wasn't a character Damian created. Maybe he was who Damian really is underneath all the money and power and protective cynicism. You think I should forgive him? I think you should decide whether what you felt for him was worth fighting for. Because if what you had together was real, even if it started with deception, then maybe the how matters less than the what. Renee wiped her eyes, looking at her brother with fresh appreciation. When had he become so wise? When had the scared 19-year-old with cancer transformed into this thoughtful young man who could see past surface complications to deeper truths? I don't know how to forgive him, she whispered. Start by forgiving yourself, for falling in love with someone complicated, for accepting help when you needed it, for being human instead of perfect. August smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like their mother. And remember what Mom always said, forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing love over fear. What if I choose love and he breaks my heart again? Then you'll survive it, just like you've survived everything else. But what if you choose fear and miss out on the best thing that ever happened to you? Renee looked at the necklace again, thinking about Clara and Eleanor, about love that transcended death and found ways to heal the living. Two women she'd never met had somehow orchestrated this moment, this choice, this chance at something extraordinary. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of extraordinary things. Maybe it was time to choose love. 3 days passed before Renee found the courage to return to the Huxley building. 3 days of staring at Clara's necklace, of long conversations with August about forgiveness and second chances, of sleepless nights wrestling with the impossible truth that love had found her through the most unlikely circumstances. She wore the emerald pendant as she walked through the gleaming lobby, its weight against her chest feeling like a talisman. The same security guard was at the front desk, and this time his expression shifted to recognition when he saw her. Ms. Hale, back to see Mr. Huxley. If he's available, let me call up. 5 minutes later, she was back in the elevator, riding toward the 50th floor with her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no idea what she was going to say. No carefully rehearsed speech this time. She only knew that the necklace around her neck connected her to a story that was bigger than her anger, bigger than her pride, bigger than her fear of being hurt again. Amanda Sterling met her at the elevator with a concerned expression. Ms. Hale, I have to warn you, Mr. Huxley hasn't been himself since your last visit. He's been working around the clock, barely sleeping. I'm not sure this is the best time. It's the only time, Renee said quietly. Please. Amanda studied her face, then nodded. He's in his office. The double doors opened to reveal Damian standing at his windows again. But this time his posture was different. Shoulders slumped, head bowed, like a man who'd given up fighting whatever demons pursued him. Papers were scattered across his desk, and an untouched cup of coffee sat cold beside his computer. Damian. He turned at the sound of his name, and Renee's breath caught. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, his usually perfect appearance replaced by the kind of bone-deep weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and endless self-recrimination. Renee, his voice was hoarse with surprise. I didn't expect. Amanda said you wanted to see me. I did. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. We need to talk. If this is about the payment plan, I meant what I said. You don't owe me anything. I've already transferred the debt to a charitable foundation. It's been forgiven entirely. This isn't about money. He studied her face, hope and wariness warring in his expression. Then what? Instead of answering, Renee reached up and unclasped the necklace, letting the emerald pendant rest in her palm. Damian's eyes fixed on it immediately, his face going white. Where did you get that? His voice was barely a whisper. My mother gave it to me. Before she died, she told me it came from a patient who wanted it to go to someone with a pure heart, someone who understood what real love looked like. Renee stepped closer, holding out the necklace. She got it from your wife, didn't she? From Clara. Damian's knees buckled, and he sank into his desk chair, as if the weight of recognition was too much to bear standing. That's impossible. Is it? Eleanor Hale, private duty nurse? She cared for Clara during her final days when you couldn't bear to watch her suffer. Renee's voice was gentle now, all the anger burned away by 3 days of understanding. Clara gave this to my mother because she saw something in her that reminded her of herself. Kindness, compassion, the ability to love completely even when it hurt. She wore that necklace on our last night together, Damian said, his voice breaking. I gave it to her for our anniversary. Emeralds from my great-grandmother's collection. Colombian stones that had been in my family for generations. She said they made her feel connected to all the women who'd loved before us. And she gave them to my mother to pass on to someone who would continue that legacy. Damian looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. Your mother, Eleanor, she was God. She was extraordinary. She held Clara's hand when I couldn't. She sang to her, told her stories, made those last days bearable when I was too much of a coward to be there. You weren't a coward. You were heartbroken. I was selfish. I left my wife to die with a stranger because I couldn't handle my own pain. He wiped his eyes roughly. And somehow, impossibly, that stranger's daughter ended up saving my life 5 years later. Renee moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk. Maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe it was always meant to happen this way. You don't believe in fate. I didn't. But holding this necklace, knowing the women who wore it before me, understanding how love can transcend death and find ways to heal the living, she paused, studying his face. Maybe I'm starting to. Why are you here, Renee? After everything I did, all the lies I told, why did you come back? Because my brother reminded me of something my mother used to say, that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing love over fear. She reached out, touching his face gently. And because I realized that David Henderson wasn't a character you created to manipulate me, he was who you really are underneath all the money and power and protective cynicism. He was who I used to be, before Clara died, before I let grief turn me into someone she would have been ashamed to know. Then maybe it's time to remember who you used to be. Maybe it's time to honor Clara's memory by actually living, instead of just existing. Damian covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not, but I'm giving it anyway, because that's what love does. It chooses hope over hurt, possibility over safety. She smiled through her tears. Besides, Clara and my mother went to a lot of trouble to bring us together. Who are we to argue with their cosmic matchmaking? I love you, he whispered. I know I don't have the right to say that after what I did, but I love you so much it feels like dying when you're not here. I love you too, not because you remind me of anyone else, not because you saved August's life, but because you're brave enough to be vulnerable with me, because you see my stubbornness and my pride and my desperate need to fix everything, and you love me anyway. He stood then, pulling her into his arms, and they held each other in the middle of his pristine office while Chicago sprawled below them, and the ghosts of two extraordinary women smiled down at their handiwork. What happens now? Damian asked against her hair. Now we learn how to build something real together. No more lies, no more tests, no more hiding behind grief or pride or fear. Renee pulled back to look at him. We honor the women who brought us together by choosing to love completely, even when it scares us. Even when it scares us, he agreed. 6 months later, they stood in the small chapel at St. Augustine Medical Center, surrounded by August and Janet and the families whose lives had been touched by both their work and their love. Renee wore Clara's emerald necklace with her simple white dress. And when Damian slipped his great-grandmother's wedding ring onto her finger, she could have sworn she felt the approval of two women who'd understood that love was stronger than death. August, healthy and vibrant and starting his second year of college, served as Renee's man of honor. In his wedding toast, he raised his glass and said, "To my sister and Damian, who proved that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing, and to Eleanor and Clara, wherever you are, thank you for being the best matchmakers in history," as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. Damian whispered in Renee's ear, "Do you think they're watching?" Renee looked up at him, this man who'd found his way back to life through love, and smiled. "I think they never stopped watching. I think they've been taking care of us all along." And in the gentle sway of their movement, in the warmth of their joined hands, in the promise of all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them, the legacy of true love lived on.